Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Family Astrologer. This is a space where we can delight in conversations related to all things family dynamics through the lens of astrology. So, in today's episode, I'm going to be laying another sort of crucial foundation for how we might look at a person's chart through the lens of family astrology. And in the last episode, we talked about the moon, which is super important, one of the most important placements that you could look at in a person's chart to tell you about family dynamics. But the runner-up is going to be what I like to call the parental axis in the chart. So we're, of course, looking at the axis of the 4th house and the 10th house. The 4th house in astrology deals with the home, lineage. It deals with property, it deals with land, it deals with our private life. So this axis between the 4th and the 10th house, they're going to be opposite one another in a birth chart. So for those of you who are learning astrology and you're not sure where to look, this is the chart of the moment. This is not a person's birth chart unless you're being born in Cleveland, Ohio right now. But this spot down here is the 4th house. It's at the root of the chart. It's the lowest point in the chart in most charts, or I should say in many charts. And then you have the 10th house. This is a house associated with culmination. It's very often the highest point in the sky. And yeah, this is the 10th house right here. And this deals with visibility. So looking at this axis here, as I was kind of saying before, the 4th house deals with our private life. So the 4th house is the house in the chart that is most personal and most visible to us. In other words, we see it, but maybe not everybody else does. It is an angular house, the 4th house. So it's something that we are immediately aware of. It's something of primary importance in our life. But again, it's a dark house. It may not be visible to everyone else. And it's a dark house not because it doesn't aspect the ascendant. If you're a student of astrology, you know that. But it's a dark house in terms of it's subterranean. It's a subterranean house. The 4th house can rule the basement. It can rule the crypt. It rules all kinds of dark places like that. So anyhow, for our purposes of family astrology focus, the 4th house deals with family. It deals with our origin. It deals with our heritage, our ancestors, the culture that we were raised in, the culture of our ancestors. It deals with the customs and traditions that were passed down to us. It deals with the nature, the essence, the energy, the vibration of the home that we grew up in. So values, things that were important to your family are going to show up through the 4th house. But which parent do we assign to the 4th house? Now, this is a little bit of a controversial question because when you first start studying astrology, what is common for astrologers to encounter is something that we refer to as the 12-letter alphabet, where a lot of times the 4th sign of the zodiac, Cancer, gets imprinted there onto the 4th house. So a lot of people think that the sign Cancer rules the 4th house. That will only be true if the sign of Cancer is on the cusp of the 4th house, or you're using whole sign where you have an Aries rising chart. That's the only way that the sign Cancer and the moon are going to rule the 4th house. There are admittedly some connections there because the 4th house, we're talking about our private life, our family, our upbringing, and what we talked about in the last episode with the moon relating to so many of those things. So admittedly, there is an overlap there. But traditional astrology gives the rulership of the father to the 4th house. We're going to break that down here in a second, but I also just want to say that a lot of the traditional astrologers of antiquity were also referencing that both parents fit in the 4th house. When you want to get nitty gritty, especially in horary or other forms of astrology, you may center questions around the father with the 4th house. But again, all families look a little different. Not every family has a mother and a father. So what I like to do is I like to apply the the parents, just like I did with the moon, just like we talked about in our last episode. This is a parental axis. We can put both parents on the 4th house and the 10th house. Why? Because this is an axis of upbringing. If the 4th house is our private life, then the 10th house is the people that we're being raised to become. Or sometimes we're raising ourselves, and sometimes it's a little bit of both. Sometimes what our parents want for us informs what we become in the 10th house. In fact, in antiquity, that was really common. You would inherit the trade and the skills of your ancestors, and that's what you would become. And that's why these two are really intimately connected in this thread. Sometimes you blaze your own path, and that's great too. And sometimes your upbringing is what inspired you to do that. So they're still very much connected. I have spent a lot of time in my chart, and I have a mother and a father who raised me. And I've spent a lot of time kind of going back and forth in this, like which parent belongs to the 4th house, which one seems to belong to the 10th house based on the signs and the planets that I have in each one. And I keep going back to it's both. It's really both. I think my dad might be a little bit more in the 4th house, but again, it's both. I could go back and forth over that I could make a case for either of my parents in either house. Both of them has strong connections with them, with each of them. And maybe your chart is different. Maybe your chart is similar. Maybe you can make a great case for either parent, but they both fit nicely in each of those houses. Or maybe one of your parents seems to fit a little bit better in the 4th house. Maybe that was your more behind the scenes parent, the parent that you saw at dinner time, the parent that you saw in the morning, the parent that really installed like some really foundational values and things like that. The parent, that sort of thing. The 10th house might be the parent that was out in the world with you a little bit more. Traditionally speaking, that might be more like the mother. In today's world, it's more common for both parents to be in the workforce. However, back in the day, at least when I was growing up, my mom didn't have to work. So she was the one running around with us doing the 10th house visibility things. People knew that she was my mom. Everybody knew my mom in my little town. So that 10th house can be the more visible parent. So with questions of paternity, right? If you're growing up in a heteronormative family, everybody's going to know who the mom is. Everyone's going to know. It's very obvious. There's not a question of maternity when a child is born. However, and that's because of that 10th house visibility. However, with the 10th house, it might be a little quieter. There might be some secrets around there or some unknowns. It might be a little private. And that can sometimes happen with the mom too. I've heard stories like that. But just generally speaking, that's one reason why we would put the mother in the 10th house traditionally and the father in the 4th. The other reason for that is that traditionally speaking, when we're speaking about land inheritances and the traditions that would often get passed down through, patriarchal society, a lot of that's coming in through the 4th house. I also like the word patria, which is a Spanish word that means like my homeland, basically. So patria being connected to the 4th house, the land that I'm from, my stomping grounds, the city that I grew up in, but also like this patriarchal sort of like father's lineage type thing connected to the 4th house. So I like that word to describe a lot of that traditional origin of why we place the father with the 4th house. But again, we can put everything related to our family, everything related to the land that we grew up in, the house that we grew up in, our private life, how that informs the home that we want to build for ourselves as adults, the family that we want to create, like how we define family, how we define what home looks like is a 4th house topic for folks. On the other side of that axis, the 10th house, that's what we become. The 10th house is often related to career. It's related to reputation, what we do as professionals, how we want the world to know us. And a lot of those values that we as individuals hold in that area of life is very much supported and informed by the roots of our chart. So another really cool layer of the 4th house is that a lot of times it's saying that this is like the point of incarnation. And I did a video called The Angles of Incarnation. I believe that's what I called it. It's on my YouTube channel. You can find it. And it's sort of a deep dive into the angles. And there we spend a lot of time talking about how the angles are the most personal point of the chart in terms of the timing of when we're born and the chart that we get. Those angles are the most personal thing. And so we think about that root of the chart as like a point of incarnation and literally rooting into a family, rooting into a human body. And some astrologers will call the IC in the chart the seat of the soul, like where it's the most subterranean, the most personal to ourselves. And so we might look at that as a description of our inner world. I think it's really cool that in dreams, a lot of times when we're dreaming and we're seeing a house or we're like in a house, I'm a big dreamer. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. But when you're like in a house, that house is going to be describing your inner world, how you're feeling on the inside. So I think that that's a really interesting connection there. The 4th house deals with the past, just like the moon, where we come from. There are some really cool and really strong threads coming through that 4th house and also through the IC, which is not always in the 4th house if you're using whole sign houses, but those can connect even further back than your immediate family or household that you grew up in. It can go back even farther. There are stories connected to your 4th house. There are stories connected to that IC that might surprise you as you start to do a lot of digging back into your family history. If you've done that, or maybe you get a big 4th house activation that invites you to do that. A lot of people start doing that ancestral work around the age of 27. When we get our progressed lunar return, we're in a 4th house perfection year, and we're moving into our Saturn return, where we're starting to become an elder. And so we want to sort of investigate our own relationship with authority figures and elders. And usually we start with the ones that had the biggest impact on us growing up. So yeah, I think of the 4th house too as like our ancestral spirits, the ghosts from the past, also the skeletons in the closet that the family has hidden, some of those hush-hush just in the family secrets that you don't find out till after the person passes, or you find out from your mom's cousin, some stories. There's a lot of times things like that will show up, and you'll see it connected to the 4th house, and it can be mind-blowing. Okay, so the other thing that is really important that we talk about here is if you're using whole sign houses, which is what I prefer to use when delineating natal charts, and you'll also find this with equal houses too, is that the midheaven is not always going to be in the 10th house, nor will the IC always land neatly in the 4th house. What you'll find is that they will commonly flank out into the 3rd and 9th houses, or subsequently the 5th and the 11th. In really high altitudes, you'll see them swing out even farther. What we might do is think about the midheaven as an emissary of the 10th house. So the midheaven is still going to have so much to say about 10th house topics. And for our purposes here with family astrology, it's still going to describe the upbringing, the values that were instilled in you about what you will become. And if you're dividing your chart up neatly amongst parents, well, the midheaven may describe your mother, if your mother seems to fit more strongly in the 10th house. So the difference is that if we're looking at transits, a transiting planet is going to spend much longer in the 10th house versus it's only going to be within orb of the midheaven for a lot shorter of a time. So yeah, that's kind of the difference there. The same can be true with the IC. The IC is going to be an emissary of the 4th house. So when we're talking about family, when we're talking about ancestry, we do want to fixate our gaze on the 4th house, but that IC is also going to give us another layer of information and also provide us with another ruler of that topic. So that's another thing I want to look at is rulership here. So again, this isn't a person's birth chart here. We'll be looking at people's charts in time, but for the purposes of demonstration here, we have Leo on the cusp of the 4th house. So that is going to tell us, if this is someone's chart, that's going to tell us a lot about a person's family. Maybe it was something, maybe the person had the experience of, my parents brag about me when they're happy about me, and they're really stubborn and fixated when I'm not doing things to their expectation. A lot of times Leo is a sign that deals with pride and joy. And so there's a lot of generosity coming in with Leo, a lot of gift giving. A lot of times it's funny. Leos give what they want to the other person to have. It's kind of funny. But yeah, so there's like a lot of generosity here, a lot of warmth, a lot of humor and big love and big feelings coming in with Leo, and grand gestures of expression for sure. There can be some rigidity there as well, as I mentioned. But we also see that the IC is in the sign of Cancer. So there's like this other sort of story going on where there's this layer of habituation, where there is a little bit more emotional connection coming in, emotional sensitivity. We would get that from this 29-degree moon too, that there's a lot of that. There's a lot of predictability there in terms of habits and rhythms and nostalgia, and just kind of going into the past and really going to the places that made us feel good the most in our memory box. So yeah, that would be a way that we would sort of delineate that. And you might say, well, that's a lot of things in the chart that are going to tell you about the 4th house. And I will say to you that, well, yeah, the 4th house is a foundational topic. It's your family. It's your private life. I promise you could spend an hour talking with someone about, the upbringing and how that shows up in the chart. You could spend a long time talking about parental dynamics, even in just a natal chart consultation. So that's where those would show up. And it's because those things are so foundational and influential and carry a strong imprint on us in our lives. And of course, echo into other areas of our life, including what we want for our home as adults. As adults, the 4th house can take on your chosen family. It will also represent your family of origin. So yeah, and if the IC is in the 3rd house for you, that might bring in a really strong thread of siblings. The involvement of siblings could be the loss of a sibling, the absence of siblings. It could be academia. Maybe academia is like a really big story here, or step siblings or half siblings. There could be like a really strong thread there. Similarly with the 5th and the 11th, if your IC is in the 5th house, maybe that really comes to life for you when you have your own children, or if you have your own children, or maybe a really important piece of the private life and the family life has to do with something related to entertainment or sports or creativity. Maybe there's a really strong thread of that from the family in there. So those are some of the ways that you can get creative about delineating those pieces of the chart. So at the end of the day, the 4th and the 10th house are highly important pieces of any person's natal chart. And one of the reasons we could argue through the lens of family astrology is that because these houses are so foundational, and really that fourth house experience really defines the way that we rise in the world. As someone who used to go to a lot of yoga classes before I had kids, I like to think of the fourth house and the 10th house as where we root to rise, which is something you'll hear a lot in yoga class. And it's true. The stronger the roots, the stronger that sunflower is going to grow and bloom into the world. And so that's something to think about too when thinking about what those fourth house placements and rulers are telling us and what that 10th house is doing. So that's just a little bit of food for thought. I'm going to plant that seed in that fourth house. And I'm sure we'll be revisiting this topic later as we move through this series. But for right now, that was your third installment of the Family Astrologer. And I look forward to future conversations with you soon. Bye.